interesting when you think about it. All right, well, we are at 1:59, so I'm going to get us started. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina with Wright Library, and we are today pleased to have Tim Waggoner with us to discuss the art of suspense. This program today is part of our Write at Wright series, where we support local writers by offering relevant workshops to the writing craft. This program is also sponsored by Wright Library Foundation. The previous programs in this series have actually been recorded if you want to check them out. You can find them at writelibrary.org/writing series. We are also recording this program, just so you know. If you have any questions for Tim, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. Make sure you are set to all panelists and attendees, and I will relay the questions to him. He's okay asking questions throughout. We're so pleased to have Tim with us today. He is an award-winning author and has published close to 50 novels. He writes dark fantasy, horror, and media tie-ins, and he teaches creative writing at Sinclair. Thank you for being here, Tim.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
I'll take it. Go ahead and you
All
go
right.
for it.
I will. Got a PowerPoint here, so let me see if I can't share my screen okay.
Oh, wonderful.
It is always first time you try this kind of stuff. Can you see the Art of Suspense there? Did it come out okay?
Yes, it looks beautiful.
All right, so when I do this, I really can't see the chat. I had the little window open a minute ago, but so if anybody asks questions, if you'd relay them, I'd appreciate it.
Gotcha.
Right, so the Art of Suspense is, you can use this for any kind of genre, whether it's an entire novel that focuses on suspense of some sort, or whether it's in a scene, in a story. It doesn't matter. They're just techniques for suspense. So you can go ahead and adapt them to whatever kind of genre, whatever kind of length you might be writing. All right, so what is suspense? Here's a quote from Wikipedia. I don't need to read it to you. It's about Hitchcockian suspense. I really like the cartoon though, because of course he's getting strangled by the same guy who's behind him about to strangle him. You know, so it kind of gives you this idea of the meta awareness that goes on when you're doing suspense. Because the audience is in a position to know more than the characters when it comes to suspense. A lot of times with any other kind of fiction, the audience is either following exactly in a character's point of view, so you know no more than them, and you only experience the story at the same rate that they do. You know as much or as little as they do. Or it may be sort of an omniscient point of view. It's less common these days, but where you do know a lot, but still not the same way. So you have an awareness of the fact that the character is in danger that they do not. And that is what creates suspense, is the audience is aware. You might not be aware specifically of what's going to happen. You know, it's like in movies. In real life, these people would be walking around and they would hear nothing, but we hear like the theme from Jaws. So we know the shark is there and we know the shark is coming in a way that characters weren't. So the audience has this kind of elevated perspective, or what it says here, an superior perspective. And also, you know, we expect something bad to happen. Maybe that something won't happen. I mean, there are plenty of false scares and things like that. But we believe something's going to happen that's bad, and that's paid off enough times in a story. And then the best part is they're powerless to intervene to prevent it from happening. And so this is why if somebody, if you've ever been in a movie theater or just at home, maybe yourself or with family members, and somebody says, don't do that, don't go there. They are trying to intervene. They're trying to help because the suspense that they feel, they want it to stop. It's somewhere in here, I have a quote from Oscar Wilde where he says, the suspense is terrible. I hope it'll last. And that's the way it is. And suspense winds you up in a way that's uncomfortable, but it's also pleasurable. I think this is the reason why when Paranormal Activity, the movie, first came out a while ago, it became such a huge hit with young people, because for them, they always have control over everything. All their technology, everything gives them complete control of the content. And then they had to sit in a movie theater and wait for like 2 hours before a ghost like showed up at the end and said boo, basically. You know, a pot would fall in the kitchen and they would all jump because they had to wait like 10 minutes for this pot to fall. So for them, having to wait, this kind of suspense was just excruciating. First time I showed, my oldest daughter is like 26 now, but she was in her teens probably, or preteen and around in there. And I showed her the first Halloween movie by John Carpenter. And at one point she got so upset, she gave Michael Myers a middle initial just so she could yell at him. She said, Michael J. Myers, you stop that right now. So the need, that feel of wanting to intervene, but being powerless is part of what creates suspense. Maybe the thing that creates suspense for readers and viewers. So here's that quote from Oscar Wilde. I can't remember where it was. So this is just a little bit that talks about why suspense is important to readers. Suspense is a real emotion and is provoked by an unreal situation. And you could say that's, anything in fiction does that, even if you're just interested in an idea. I mean, it's the idea itself is just a concept. And then if you're interested, you find yourself reacting to the things that occur, it's still just a concept. I mean, it's nothing is happening that's real. Maybe nonfiction, you might know that it did happen to somebody. So that might be more of a genuine reaction, I guess, to a genuine thing anyway. So because we know the situation's not real, it is perfectly fine to feel this anxiety. And it's the same thing in horror if you feel fear, because it's not real. Maybe for a roller coaster ride, you are as safe as you could be in that situation, but there's still some, potential danger to it. With a roller coaster, it's hard to convince yourself you're okay because our minds and our bodies are not designed to perceive anything that's unreal, because there's no such thing. Everything you perceive in the world is real. If you make a bad guess, like if there's a shadow that goes by and maybe you're a little bunny on the ground, you have to assume it's a hawk or an owl or something and move, because if you're wrong, you're dead. And if you're, or if you're right, you're dead. And if you're wrong, doesn't matter. Nothing's going to happen to you. But if you run both ways, you increase your chances of being okay. So it's really strange for audiences to constantly experience something, whether they read or watch a movie or TV show or whatever, and your brain is constantly having to remind yourself it's not real. It's almost a kind of definition of insanity in a way that, we're constantly telling our senses to ignore what we perceive. But in the case of stuff like this, I mean, the suspense, we can feel all the feelings because nobody's really going to be hurt. The character, especially if you watch a film and the actor is somebody you've seen before and you'll see again in a movie. You could start the book over. You could stop reading the story and they'd stay in a state of suspension. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do that that it's not real, and it makes it very, very safe. So part of creating suspense in a way is it's not exactly torturing a reader, but kind of, you are purposely helping them to make themselves feel kind of bad. They want to do it because they wouldn't pick up your book or story. They wouldn't keep reading it. It's completely consensual. They can always stop. But knowing as a creator that they know it's not real helps you. Plus the people, you have to remind yourself your characters aren't real. I mean, when you're the god of your own universe, you want to be the god in the book of Job that just does a whole lot of horrible things to Job to make a point. Regardless of whether that's metaphor or whatever, it's just in terms of being a god, you want to go ahead and be pretty cruel to your people. And the whole thing about it being pretend helps, because nobody is getting hurt by this. So the part of it too is the catharsis, the relief, the sense of relief. And really good suspense stories, short story might only have it once, novel or a movie might have it at multiple points until we get to the point at the very end where Jaws explodes. Supposedly at the time, somebody told Steven Spielberg that you can't shoot an air tank and have it explode like that. It's impossible. And he said, it doesn't matter. If the audience has followed me this far, they'll believe anything I show them. And he was right. People needed that catharsis so badly. They did not question that explosion. It was perfect, in terms of a work of art, even if it's not accurate. Just tell yourself it's the one tank that had that factory flaw and the sheriff didn't know it. So he just got really, really lucky. So in suspense, things do tend to work out just fine. That's one of the things that makes this, technique, even though it overlaps horror in a big way, makes it really different, because if somebody dies, there's no release, not the kind of release people expect or people look for from suspense. If it was a horror story, you don't know what in the world's going to happen, whether somebody lives, dies, or whether they live or die in any kind of horrible situation they might have ended up with because of what occurred to them. In terms of suspense, though, there may be a price to be paid. Some people may not have survived the story. Your character may be battle weary or even wounded or whatever, but in general, it works out fine. So that's a big difference between suspense and horror. Does anybody have any questions or comments about any of this stuff before I move on? I want to pause since I can't see the chat and just...
I am not seeing any at this time, but guys, if you have any, just plug them in.
Yeah, anytime you want. You're not gonna, I've been teaching for 30 years. You're not gonna stop me. I was teaching class one year. Nobody would do this anymore. It was many years ago. But students had, they faked a terrorist like takeover of the classroom next door for a presentation.
Oh,
And I
wow.
looked at, yeah, nobody would do it now. But I looked in the hallway and there's somebody like in complete, camo
Oh,
gear or whatever with a gun. The gun looked like it was too light. But if one of my students hadn't said, it's my buddy, they're doing a presentation. So if that didn't stop me from teaching, you're not going to.
you are just a true professional. Mostly we have that your Funkos are awesome, which we
Oh,
already know. So go ahead and guys, when you just have a question, go ahead and type it in and I'll let you know.
I should have brought my like Hitchcock Funko over here. I got my Psycho one over there, my Norman Bates, but my Hitchcock's over with my shelf of creators. They have like writers and directors and things like that. So here's some techniques, speaking of Psycho, for creating suspense in fiction. So one of the things, you don't have to do this throughout the story. You don't do it throughout the book. You may do it just periodically to create suspense in a story, but you give the reader a lofty viewpoint. So the main character does not know, like it's Janet Leigh in the shower, Janet Leigh's just there, but giving the reader a lofty viewpoint. And I can't remember if literally this happens in the movie Psycho. I think it does. I know it does when we see the shadow, of the murderer approaching, that she doesn't. But we're aware of a threat to her that she is not aware of. And that's the lofty viewpoint. It's like you're a god or a divine being or whatever that is able to see more than just one mere mortal could possibly see. And so the lofty viewpoint could be something along the lines of, you have a killer in your story and you write a scene that shows the killer walking to the hotel. You don't let people know who the killer is. You don't delve into the thoughts enough to reveal who this person is, but the audience knows killer is coming. And then if you show us Janet Leigh's character getting ready to take a shower, we assume the two are connected, are going to be connected soon. And we worry for that character because we know something bad is coming to that character. That character has no clue at all that there's any kind of murder that's going to be coming. So the lofty viewpoint can work really, really well. And you can write a scene. You can even do similar things to what you can do in a movie. I mean, a movie might show you a bomb like underneath, football bleachers and, ticking away. You can write a scene that just is from maybe an omniscient point of view, and you can talk about what the people are doing, this, that, and the other thing. And then they don't know there's a bomb there. You just describe it, ticking away while this activity is going on. Doesn't have to be a long scene, a few paragraphs, a page maybe. But you're still giving people that lofty viewpoint. So you might use for suspense, techniques that you might not normally think to use in your fiction, especially if you're used to writing like first person. First person narratives are hard to create suspense because your character lived. We already know that. Unless it's first person present tense, in which case they could die, but it still begs the question, what? How are they telling this? What's going on? Maybe your readers will kind of believe that we're sort of privy to the person's thoughts as they are living them, but we don't think in terms of I like that all the time. We don't narrate our lives. So it's harder for first person, but third person, you can do it great. You can use time constraints too, whether it is literally the ticking time bomb, but there's all kinds. Whether, something has to be done by midnight. My wife and I just watched a movie called Freaky, which is sort of a humorous horror movie about a teenage girl and a serial killer that they, unbeknownst to either, the killer has just obtained a magic dagger that causes you to switch souls. And you have until midnight until it's permanent. And so we know that, our hero, she only has so many hours to try to get her body back. Or else, since she's in the serial killer body, she's probably going to go to jail or be executed or something for all the crimes. So any kind of time constraint. DOA, there's two versions of this movie where, the character is poisoned. There is no antidote. And it's true, there is no antidote. So he's got about 48 hours to solve his own murder. And in the end, he dies, or we know he's going to die very soon. So that's like a classic one. So any kind of time constraint you can come up with that just means that they don't have all week, month, years to solve their problem. It's also a reason why later on, I don't think it's in here, but one of the things you do with suspense often is isolate the protagonist so they don't have any help. That's one of the reasons why they often don't run to the police. They don't have time. Or if the police don't believe them, throw them in jail for a little while to figure out what's going on. They're dead, or their loved one they're trying to save is dead, or whatever. So the time constraints are something that also removes a lot of the basic questions, like why don't you go to the cops? Why don't you seek help? Why don't you take all the time to come up with an awesome, cool plan for dealing with this instead of reacting very fast and trying something and seeing what happens? So the time constraints can work really well. And all these things, the time constraints, along with all kinds of stuff, applies pressure. So applying pressure to the character would be like raising the stakes. So, first the killer comes in and it looks like the killer is going to kill the Janet Leigh character, but maybe Janet Leigh's best friend was supposed to show up, or her lover, or whoever, somebody she loves shows up while the killer is in the room. And then the killer goes to kill that person. Janet Leigh comes out, and then the killer's like, oh, I can go ahead and start manipulating you by threatening your friend. Why don't you go do this for me or that for me? And suddenly the stakes are raised, because not only does Janet Leigh have to go out and maybe commit a robbery or I don't know what, but if she fails to do it and gets caught by the cops, her friend dies. If she fails to do anything at the killer's whim, her friend dies. So the pressure just keeps getting greater and greater. Now she's got cops after her. People think she's crazy. Who knows? So anything you can think of in suspense to apply the pressure to raise the stakes. Short story probably wouldn't have a whole lot of room for this, but in novel you have a lot more rooms. You create dilemmas for the characters, like impossible choices, or things they have to do they ordinarily wouldn't do. One of the things that really helps when you're writing suspense, or writing anything really, is just to know how far your character can be pushed. What will they do when they have to? If it's the kind of character that breaks down and freezes, probably not going to be a good story about them, because nothing's going to happen. But are they willing? Like if you're, for a lot of people, if their children are threatened, they'll do things they would never do at any other time to help them. If it was a stranger, there may be things they wouldn't do. Who knows? So the dilemmas for them would be choices that they would have to make. Choices about, maybe the killer gives them a choice of, which of these two people should I kill? And if you don't choose, I'm killing both of them and you. And then that's an impossible choice. So you can go ahead and see what the character would do at that point. Is there a way that they can get out of it, a way they can solve it? Could they talk the killer out of it? Could they make a new kind of a weird bet or trade that's even worse potentially for them, but at least it stops this from happening now, which creates an extra dilemma and applies more pressure. So any dilemmas you can come up with, now they can arise out of the thing of suspense, but they can also be like ancillary. I mean, when the cops get involved, that's extra. If they've got something else going on, if they go ahead and do this thing that maybe they're going to miss the court date for custody of their kids and they're going to lose their kids. It could even be something smaller. It's still important hugely to the character, but not life and death like maybe the main story problem. Complicate matters, make things hard for characters to do. The easiest one is to get them injured. The most ridiculous thing is to watch them trip. I love to watch people in movies trip, because if you watch their feet, they don't like really trip. They just kind of fall. Some of them are really good at faking it and some of them aren't. But they get the twisted ankle and then they can't go anywhere, or they just happen to be in the place where their cell phone won't work. That's why a lot of movies now are opting to be in the 70s, so there's no cell phones. A lot of horror movies and things, which is scary, because it's like to like young people, those are like medieval times now. So, for us, the medieval times maybe have been like, maybe not medieval, but like the 19th century, where they just didn't have phones. They didn't have cars. They didn't have whatever. But now for them, it's the 1970s pretty much, which just makes me feel really, really old. But any kind of complication you can come up with. So an injury to somebody, they're trying to protect, a car accident because they are rushing to get away or to someplace, and suddenly they're in a car accident. They don't have to be things that arise directly out of whatever the main story problem or threat is, but they arise because of all the stuff that's happening because of it. You wouldn't want a meteor to slam into the earth in the middle of the story that has nothing to do with the story. You wouldn't want like a hurricane to suddenly show up, unless, you've got a hurricane going on or approaching before everything begins, in which case then you're okay. But anything you can do to complicate matters is fine. You just don't want it to become so ridiculous that it's like a Looney Tunes cartoon where it's so exaggerated and so many things are happening that it just becomes ridiculous. And you have to be careful too about the complications seeming to, that they don't make your story impossible, I guess. When the movie Crawl came out, which is about a hurricane, but also about people that get trapped with alligators inside a house during a hurricane, and the alligators in there wound them pretty quickly, so they can't just get out easily. But my wife used to be an EMT, and as soon as one of those people got bit, she's like, that's it. They bleed out in a few minutes. And I'm like, I tell her, this is action adventure world. People are a little tougher. Their bones don't break as easy. Their blood coagulates a little faster. And she's like, no.
I love that she's like, this is not realistic. We do have a question. Emmanuel wants to know, do you have an exercise you do for creating a really good / evil villain? We maybe not there yet, but Sasha,
that's okay.
Curious. Yeah, she's curious too.
It depends on what you're trying to do. In suspense, a lot of times, the more capable a villain seems to be, the more they seem like a force of nature, the more it is that it doesn't feel like your character could possibly deal with it. You know, I mentioned Halloween earlier, and Michael Myers is a good example. He seems completely unstoppable, and he is on a collision course with this young, bookish teenager that has shown, you know, she's really sweet and she's smart, but she's shown nothing in terms of fighting and ability for that. And he's mowed down her friends. So the friends all act tougher and talk tougher than her. So how can she possibly, go up against this kind of force? Other people like it in suspense if there's at least some element of humanity in the character. Maybe the villain thinks that they're doing a good thing in their own twisted way. If there's any kind of unpredictability in the evil force, because then readers don't know what it'll do. The character of Two-Face in Batman's a really good one, because, you know, Two-Face has a double-sided coin, one side's all scarred up, and before he makes any choice, he just flips it. And if it comes down on the good side, he doesn't do a bad thing. Like, he won't kill somebody. If it comes down on the bad side, he kills them. And he will always do this no matter what, because of his weird psychosis that he has. Even to the point where if his men try to go across it, like if he's got henchmen and they pull a gun, he'll shoot them, because, you know, this is what fate decided. You know, he believes that. And so that makes it really unpredictable for the readers. And of course, you can do whatever you want as a writer, which is cool. You know, you can help your character get out of danger just by having the coin come up a certain way. And then, of course, in like one of maybe the original Two-Face story, the coin comes down and like lodges in a small crack in a floorboard, so it doesn't go down. And Two-Face has to choose for himself, and he's just like paralyzed because he doesn't know what to do. I think another one, Batman has a bunch of fake coins just like his and throws them all up in this air, because then he can't tell which one's his that comes down. But so any kind of character like that can work really well.
We have another question that kind of relates. Do you think a good villain can help set the pace of the story? The hero has to stay one step ahead, ?
Yeah, because in a lot of suspense stories, it depends on the kind, but the type that we're talking about, like a regular person, not like a superhero or a military person or whatever, cop, you know, they don't have any training for dealing with this kind of stuff. So the stories tend to be very reactive. Usually they're reactive to a certain point until the character finally has had enough and starts trying to be reactive, which in movies is usually like the last third, maybe, where they start trying to, like, then they come up with a plan to trap the killer. But up to that point, they've just been running or trying to survive or trying to, you know, warn somebody ahead of time. But it's all in reaction to what the killer's doing. You know, in that sense, you know, just symbolically, you know, the killer, the threat, whatever it is just like any kind of force in life we can't control, that comes along and we are forced to react to it, adapt and change, somehow try to overcome. So yeah, the villain is the one that gives your story its shape. I mean, if your villain is not there, your character is just living their life and doing just fine. Nothing bad is happening to them. If you're going to go ahead and portray the killer as a human, the complications can be theirs as well. You know, they may get injured and suddenly it's a little harder for them to stalk the character, carry out their plan. Or this happens a lot. They get captured by the cops and have to escape. You might see that. It could be anything that might create a dilemma for them. Maybe this person wants to kill a family and one of the kids reminds the killer of him or herself and finds it harder to do what they need to do. Maybe assassin suddenly finds it hard. Maybe the assassin has to assassinate somebody they used to date in high school. And suddenly it's like, oh, I can't do that. I love that person. You know, you can come up with all kinds of weird dilemmas, but that are not just giving, you know, their actions don't just give shape to the protagonists. They also can give shape to what they'll do afterwards because of whatever complications are in there. So yeah, I guess the only thing I'd watch doing is just don't do the thing where, sorry, I'm checking to make sure my mic was plugged in. I didn't see the little plug back here. Just don't make somebody mentally ill and assume they're violent. Anytime I have like a mentally ill character that is, you know, violent on some level, I always make the case that the vast majority of people who are mentally ill are non-violent and no threat to anybody, and that this person is an exception. And then I just don't rely on characters like that from book to book to book. So, because otherwise you keep making that explanation and people are like, I read this in your last book. But I try to be real careful to make sure that people don't assume that anybody with a specific mental illness is going to hurt them. Or that, you know, anybody with a mental illness is like one step away from being Norman Bates there with the knife. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Being unpredictable is good. You know, often I'll say in terms of like when I'm talking about just plotting a scene, a lot of times, you know, we have an idea of where it's supposed to go. And if we have an idea of where this scene is supposed to go, you can bet your readers probably already know where it's going to go to. So one of the things you can do is ask yourself, what's the one thing that could not happen now? And so if your character is driving across town to get to a job interview, and in your mind, the next scene is at the interview, that's when you have something happen that stops them. Their tire blows out. They're in a car wreck. Somebody runs up to their cars and they screech to a halt, and somebody bangs on the hood and says, you got to help me. Somebody's trying to kill me. You know, anything that would suddenly move the story off into a different direction. So you could do that when you're plotting a story. You could do that if you tend not to plot too much and you're just writing, or if you're plotting and you feel like there's a certain obvious inevitability to where the scene's going to go. Being unpredictable can work really, really well. One time I plotted an entire book. It was for a proposal, so I haven't written it yet. But I plotted an entire book where I just made I didn't come up with any kind of plot to it other than the beginning. And what I did was I made the decision point be like the opposite of what I think they should do, or the worst choice they could make, to see how that turned out. And the story that came out of it was pretty interesting, the way the plot put together. So you could always just ask yourself at every junction, what's the least predictable thing, or what's the thing you'd be least likely to do, and see how that turns out. But if readers know that they don't know what's going to happen next in your story, not only does that create a lot higher reader interest in whatever you're writing, but for suspense, they know that they can't guess. There's no way that they can guess what you're going to do, because they know from reading so far into your piece that you'll do anything at any time. You don't have to do it all the time, just enough so that they know that they're not safe in your narrative, not safe in a bad way, like they're going to be traumatized by it, but not safe as in that they can't predict what's going to happen next. So there we have the really good villain and a really good hero. For some people, this is almost like for some suspense, it's like making comic book characters where, you know, they are somebody who is just evil, and somebody who's just good. And if you're writing that kind of fiction, that's fine. I mean, that's like just more like adventure fiction, maybe. But I think in general, if your hero has a little villain in them and your villain has a little hero in them, you know, that probably works okay. Some fiction might work well if you can't tell which one's the villain, depending. Like a lot of noir fictions like that. It's all degrees of gray, and which one, you know, is going to survive. Sometimes it's just survival of the fittest. It's not really survival of the goodest or who deserves to survive. It's just how the story plays out. Sometimes they're both just humans, and one may just function as a villain in a particular story, and one may function as a hero, but in real life, neither one is. In the Fugitive, especially the movie Fugitive, I mean, Tommy Lee Jones is like the villain to Harrison Ford, but he's not. Eventually, toward the end, he becomes an ally, but he's just chasing Harrison Ford, who he thinks is a murderer. And he says at one point, I don't care if you're innocent or guilty. You know, his job's just to catch him. You can worry about guilt or innocence later. And so you don't have to have, you know, a story that has a villain in it necessarily to create suspense. Survival stories can be like that, where there's not necessarily a villain. There's still suspense. You know, if you're writing about people trying to survive when they're cast away at sea, or, you know, stuck on a mountain somewhere. A lot of kids' stories can, and young adult stories too, can create conflict without a single villain in it. So you don't necessarily need to, but I think that having a villain to stand in for, that unknown force, that whether it's death or bad things in life that could occur to us at any time that we have to deal with, I think it's one of the things that people do like in suspense, and I think they really respond to really well. I think in other stories like just trying to survive, things along the way take on that aspect. So like it's, oh no, here comes the storm on the ocean. And then another scene, here comes the shark. And another scene, oh, we're dehydrated, so now we're hallucinating and my buddy is going to attack me. And so there's always like a force that's kind of the villain force, but it's like different things manifest. It's like it takes on, like it changes different clothes. Like it would be an actor that would put on a different little mask. So now's the shark mask, now's the storm mask. So I guess maybe you do still kind of have a villain like that too. But just try to avoid making you want your villain to be a good threat and to be stronger than your character and challenge your character, maybe seem insurmountable, but don't make them so strong that they are so godlike that there's no way in the world anybody can do it. Some supernatural horror does that, but somebody usually finds some kind of way to deal with whatever this thing is somehow, or at least they find a way to survive it, even if they can't defeat it.
We have a little bit of feedback. Sue says, thank you for the input on mental illness and violence issue as far as characters go. She says she works in that field, and I agree, that was wonderfully phrased. Emmanuel says, I'm using a similar technique. This was a little bit back, where one of the two guys in the story is part of a trio of friends who are going together in the adventure, like if Hermione was plotting against Harry and Ron. So that's interesting. That's kind of like internal within the group, kind of. And then we have one more general question. Could you, and this could be answered at the end because you may talk about it a little. Could you talk a little bit about plotting as a technique for planning your writing? But Carolyn says you can answer that later.
Sure, if you can remind me.
Yeah.
Because I can, and especially if we get too close to the end, I want to go ahead and make sure to
open it up for more.
I do have a technique you can use that will work really well for the kind of thing she's talking about. Having like 3 friends and then start to plot against one another, that works good, because if you imagine 3 people that have to survive, when is somebody gonna, like, some of their worst notions or the worst part of themselves be revealed, or the worst parts they don't even know they have? And of course, it really helps to understand how lack of food and lack of water start to affect people pretty quickly and what that does to them. All of us would probably become pretty nasty in short order and not make good choices. We'd make terrible choices just because our brains aren't working right. And a lot of times, people, if they write scenes like this or whole stories like this, they act as if the people are making rational, conscious choices, and they're not. Fears can go ahead and get to people. Past traumas may suddenly be brought out by this new trauma. All kinds of things can happen. So yeah, that can work really well. And plus, maybe they're all kind of starting to dement a little bit, and so the readers don't even know which one's going to end up being the villain, or they may switch back and forth, depending on what's happening. They manage to get a little food and water, their brains will start working again, at least a little bit. I should try that sometime. I don't think I've ever done that. So you want to put the characters the readers care about in jeopardy. So even if you're writing like a noir story where everybody's just kind of, maybe not a bad guy, but everybody's gray in terms of their moral bearings, I guess, you want to try to go ahead and find one way to make you to care about a person. So maybe it's because they used to be a better person before this happened to them, or maybe they got a kitten they really like. And so even something small that might sort of hint to the reader, this is the one you're supposed to care about. It could also just be that you write with a close enough point of view that we follow this person, we get a sense of who they are, why they think what they think, and their emotions, and maybe their physical reaction to any physical damage that they take. It creates sympathy for them, even if ordinarily we might not have any. I mean, the writer can just do that by the way you write about them. But yeah, we need to care about these people, because otherwise it doesn't really matter. And this is why in a lot of slasher movies, people will laugh and have fun, because they don't give a damn about the people getting mowed down at all. They're just nobodies, or they're completely obnoxious, and they deserve to get mowed down. The movie Freaky was like that. I think just about everybody who died was obnoxious, and and we wouldn't have cared if they died, or wish they would, because of the kind of things they were doing. So I think that having, at least your protagonist be somebody that the reader's supposed to care about. You don't have to make them the best person in the world. You can just make them a flawed human being trying to do the best they can. And especially if they're trying to do the best they can in ways we can all relate to, like they're having trouble, making enough money to put food on the table or pay their bills, or they're trying to raise their teenage kid and don't understand teenagers, whatever. Those kind of things will make us care about a character just fine. If we can identify with them. They don't have to be, paragons of virtue. Include more promises and less action. This is a weird thing about suspense. You sort of hint that things are going to come eventually, but you don't have them show up right away. It's not suspense to hear like a floorboard creak and you turn around and then somebody hits you. It happens too fast. If you hear a floorboard creak, that's a promise somebody's in the house. You don't show somebody in the house right away. You keep drawing that out. And then maybe you hear another sound that says somebody's in there. And then if it's a movie, it'll end up being a cat usually. And then the killer comes by later or something. So don't do the cat. But the more you can make promises of some sort in your story that something bad is about to occur, and then have it, teased and drawn out and maybe delayed until later, the more you can do that, the better. Suspense is like a tease. It's not like a delivery of something. It's the tease of when's it going to show up. We know it's coming. How bad's it going to be? When's it going to get here? But if you do make a promise, you keep it. So if there is the floorboard creak, yeah, houses can go ahead and creak all the times for all kinds of reasons. But in the reader's mind, it's a signal that something is in the house. So even if it's a cat, you got to show something's in the house. Something caused that creak. It doesn't have to be the killer. Could be something else. But you always keep your promise. And if you keep your promises in ways that are unpredictable, that means that whenever you make a promise like that, you indicate something's going to happen. Readers will never know what's going to happen. And so that's going to be unpredictable to them. If every time there's a creak, it's the killer and the killer kills somebody, they know every single time you signal it. And you can't have suspense if something is known. Even with a lofty viewpoint, we know things are going to occur. Like we may know two things are on a collision course, but we don't know when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen. So let the characters tell readers your plans. You want to be careful and not do the bad guy who's captured James Bond and then explains the whole thing, how they're going to do their plot. So then once James Bond gets away, you can stop the plot. You don't want to do that. I think in the Incredibles, they call that monologuing, when the villain starts monologuing. You don't want to do that, but you can have the plans come out through if the character has allies to talk to and to discuss things. If the character is like doing something illegal and tells the cop, this is why I have to do it, and the cop's like, no way, I got to stop you. We still know what the character intends. We could just be privy to their thoughts as they think it out, maybe. You can tell us just by describing. If you have a killer and we're never in the killer's head, but we see the killer is described as, his or her eyes are following a certain person. Maybe the killer's sitting on the park bench, looks like everybody else, but the killer's following a certain person. We know that the killer's plans are probably to go after that person eventually. And the character is telling your readers that just by their motions, not literally telling with words or anything. But you want to go ahead and the plans don't have to work out. One of the best things that what I love to do, I love heist movies, because heist movies will go ahead and they will set up like for 10 or 15 minutes this complicated plan that will actually never happen in the movie. You get to watch 10, 15 minutes of worthless content in a way. It's just to design the suspense to see how many things could go wrong, because we know it's supposed to happen, but everything goes wrong in a heist movie. So I love to write that stuff. I love to write it when the character's making plans and I know that their plans are going to go straight to hell the moment they try to do anything. So just because they have plans doesn't mean they're going to necessarily work out. Cut down on the violence, because suspense is about the anticipation, and violence is, I don't want to call it a result, but I mean, there's no anticipation. It's happening. So suspense tends to be like promising things, and they do occur eventually, but they don't occur right away. So if you watch movies that are more about suspense or read books that are more about suspense, they tend to be relatively bloodless in a lot of ways and not a lot of violence in them. They feel violent because there's this, aura of violence that may be like a cloud of violence that hovers over the entire story. But if you went through and like ticked up, how many actual violent things occurred or how many deaths, there wouldn't be a lot. I mean, the suspense stories are about a threat more than they are about an actual, encountering or interacting with danger. You might do it at the end, but in general, they're about a threat that's on the horizon, a threat that's coming, a threat that's all around you, that kind of thing. And you're always one step ahead of your readers in the sense that, you've got it plotted out by the time it's all done, not necessarily when you sit down to write it. That you know exactly what's going to happen. And you know that if you're trying to indicate to the readers it's going one way, you're always going to like pull the rug out from under them or make it happen a little bit differently or alter it. So you're always aware. It's like being a magician. I mean, writing is always like that. You're always directing the audience's attention away from whatever the trick is, or to try to like make it seem a lot more interesting when it's a simple little trick or whatever. You're always aware of how humans react to this stuff, and you're always manipulating their reactions to it. We learn that from being readers and getting feedback on stuff.
We have a quick question. If you have an example of a heist movie.
Any of the Ocean's movies. Last one I saw was about Danny Ocean's sister. I think it was Ocean's 9. I think it was, maybe. I can't remember if I've seen all of them, but yeah, those, the original Ocean's 11, 2, and I think the Thomas Crown Affair has like a heist in it too. They're all over the place. The original Pink Panther movie does. I think the second one, Return of the Pink Panther, does. Just bunches and bunches and bunches of them.
We're hearing in the chat, Ocean's 8, check out Money Heist on Netflix. I have a question for you really briefly. Have you ever seen the Rick and Morty episode that examines heist as a plot? Have you seen that? It's an adult animation.
So. I've seen a bunch of them, but I haven't watched any of the recent ones.
It's in season 4. It was really interesting because they just make fun of the entire heist genre. So you might enjoy that.
Yeah, I would love that.
Are you get a kick out of that? So yeah. Somebody else agrees. I think you would like that, and they do too.
Yeah. And parodies like that are great because they show you the kind of story elements that are so common that audiences are either tired of them or so used to them they won't have an impact. And you'll know, okay, I don't want to do this just the normal way. If I'm going to do it, you don't have to make fun of it, but you want to make some kind of twist on it or do it differently. So any kind of parody like that is a wonderful thing in terms of you learning how to do a story even better type of story. Now I got to go watch that Rick and Morty thing. So suspenseful pacing, it is a weird way to write. You actually create a slow pace, but because readers want to see how the scene is going to happen, they speed up when they read it. So when they read it, to them, it creates a strange effect where it is killing them because it's just like, like a coil winding tighter and tighter and tighter. But because they want to get to the end of it, and they still have to read one word at a time, but they can speed up their reading. They want to get to there. So to them, it feels fast. So it's really strange. You can't do that in a movie because they're stuck at the rate of speed with which it's delivered to them, the story. Again, which is why I think I don't know if it was millennials or I don't think it was Gen Z it wasn't Gen Z when Paranormal Activity came out, but I saw the first one in the theater with my daughter was a teenager. And I was just like, God, please let something happen. I've seen a billion horror movies, but this was killing me. But the audience, the young people, were just absolutely wrapped and quivering with suspense. So if they could have sped that damn thing up, they would have. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people watching it at home hit the fast forward, to see when the pot's going to come down. So you focus on step-by-step detail and action. Sometimes literary fiction does this to really create a sense of place. Mystery fiction will do this so they have a place to hide clues a lot of times. Any kind of story that deals with place might have step-by-step detail. But in this case, the detail works toward but delays the ultimate payoff. So there's an example here. So this is from a short story. It's a woman she knows an assassin is stalking her in the city. So we start off with a thought of hers, says he's here. And then the narration, it wasn't so much a thought as it was an instinct, a prickle on the back of her neck, a tightening in her gut. That's still just kind of describing he's here, but I'm making it more like visceral. Laura paused at a pawnbroker's and pretended to look through the window at the items displayed, guitars, jewelry, video cameras. She was uncomfortably aware of what a good target she made, standing still. Maybe it says let me move our faces down. Our faces are covering the PowerPoint here. There we go. Prickle on the back of her neck, a tightening in her gut. Laura paused at a pawnbroker. Oh, I said that. She was uncomfortable where a good target she made. Standing still, back of the head presented almost as if she had a bullseye tattooed there. She could almost imagine him sighting on her head, seeing it through crosshairs, finger on the trigger, skin not sweaty, flesh cool as he calmly, professionally began to squeeze. Stop it, she told herself. Neil would never risk acquiring her on a busy city street. And when I use the word acquiring and the fact that she kind of knows how he would kill her, it tells you that she knows something about the assassin's trade herself. She wouldn't use the word acquire if she was just a regular person like you and me. There were too many witnesses. Neil preferred to work neat. Besides, it was too windy. Even as good a shot as he was, he might well miss. So same deal, she knows wind conditions affect, somebody shooting. So I'm creating some mystery there as well about her as a character. And Neil absolutely loathed taking a second shot. So now we know she knows Neil, at least to some level. So much so that he never loaded a weapon with more than one round of ammunition, one of his more colorful personality quirks. Still, she was grateful for it now. It meant she was relatively safe, emphasis on relatively. So if you read this thing, if it was a movie, all you'd see is a woman who walked up to a pawn shop window, stopped and looked at it. That's it. That's the only thing that happens here. Emotionally, mentally, a lot of stuff happens. But the payoff is she going to get shot or not? Still don't know if Neil's going to take a shot. I finished the whole story. I can't remember what happens next, though. I've been using this as an example for so long, I honestly can't remember what happens next. I know that the payoff to the story is they're husband and wife who take turns hunting each other. They don't really kill each other. They are assassins, both of them, but they take turns just for fun.
Somebody, I think, remembers this as an example from one of your classes.
Yeah, I use this one a lot because it works.
Great.
It works pretty well. And so, you can see the different kinds of details that are there, thoughts that she has, physical feelings, kind of her projecting. And one of the cheats you can use, this works in any kind of story you're telling, is that you can create pictures without having anything happen. Like, this is what she's imagining. And I'm using physical sensations here, even though she's only imagining them from the point of view of somebody else who may not be doing anything. But it still creates a picture. It still creates action, a sense of action coming. And of course, I build these details and then there's no payoff. There's no shot that happens. So that creates this even more suspense. I've kind of promised there's going to be a shot, maybe going to be a shot, but it hasn't occurred yet. So it's weird because you end up writing more in order to delay people getting to the information that they really want, which is, how's this going to happen? It's not useless writing. It's not purposeless writing because you're still creating an experience for your readers. It's like if you're icing a cake, you don't have to make it pretty. It's going to taste the same probably. But if you do all this pretty flourishes to it, make it look professional and whatever, it enhances the experience. It may make the cake seem to taste better. But really, that's kind of what it is. It's not really making any, unless you think every word is the cake. It's not really the substance of the cake at all, but it is the substance of the experience of the cake. I guess I want cake.
And now I would like some cake. Apparently I misspoke earlier. We think, is this from Writing in the Dark, which is your textbook?
Yeah, I used it. I used this, I used part of this stuff in this presentation for the chapter in Suspense in there.
And someone shared that it was nominated for the Bram Stoker Nonfiction Award. So that's fantastic as well. I didn't know that. And they love the contrast between the character's imagination and the reality of the story. And I agree. Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
I like to write with a close point of view as much as I can. Even if I'm going to have multiple points of views throughout a novel, I think it just, especially when I'm writing about stuff that's unreal, that it really helps make it feel more real. I don't know, just what I do. There should be another page. There we go. Oh, so normally in a workshop, I'll do like, actually, like if I'm a face-to-face workshop, I'll have people go ahead and do some writing. In a workshop like this, a lot of times what I'll do is either ask if people want to do that or say, you can practice these things later on at home. And then I can answer any kind of questions that you want. So does anybody have any thought? Let me go ahead and see. I can get.
Guys, yeah, go ahead and respond in the chat if you want to take the pause to write. Or we also have describe a close point of view.
Oh, close point of view is when I'll leave this up in case anybody wants to write this down. And if anybody wants to like just have this PowerPoint, you can just go to my website. I have a contact tab and email me and I'll send it to you. Website's just timwaggoner.com. The close point of view is if you imagine that your character, they have a camera on their shoulder, but there are also wires from that camera that go into their head. So the camera has, a little microphone too. So it's anything that they see and hear, but the wires into their head allows you into their thoughts, into any memories they might have, any physical sensations they might have that are kind of caused by outward things like a breeze or inward, like their stomach churning. And the way that you write at a close point of view is you write it the way we all experience life. We have all this data all the time coming in, and we sift through it. We try to decide what to pay attention to, or we do so by instinct, like a bang goes off and everybody turns in the corner, to the direction of the sound to see what happened without any kind of thought to it. And doing that, is close. You can get even closer where you do something like James Joyce, and it's all this stream of consciousness, thoughts and images and whatever that is not, you're not clearly directed how to understand it. You're supposed to try to let all of it wash over you and somehow, experience the consciousness on the page, which I don't know how many people do that. I know a lot of people who started reading, including me, that eventually go, I got the idea. And you kind of stop there.
We'd like some elaboration on that. Can that only be done from a first person point of view?
No, it can be done third person. You can do it any person. Doesn't matter. You can take the same story and, you may just go ahead and it could be first person, second person, third person. It creates different effects when you do that. And some lines would have to be rewritten, but I've taken whole stories and just replaced the he's with I's or you's just to see. I always make a new copy in case I don't like what I did. I just wrote I think the last story I wrote went through an I and a he, and before I finally settled on you.
That's fascinating. And I agree. I write a little bit myself. I've never done that. And I like that idea. So I'm going to steal it.
Yeah. If you're not sure, I just take a paragraph usually, and I'll go ahead and just play with it and see. I like to do it earlier on just because I do find if I change a voice of an entire story, it takes a little reworking for it feels a little smoother. If you're writing first person, it brings up a whole lot of questions that a lot of readers don't think about. But one thing is how does this person, we know the person survived to tell the story. So they're okay, or at least they were at the time of the telling. We have no clue who they're telling the story to. We have no clue how much time has elapsed. We don't know why they're telling this story. And the person has like the best memory on earth, because most of us can't remember what we did like 5 minutes ago in any kind of specific detail. And so we are perfectly willing to kind of believe that. But it does raise a lot of questions. And I think you can do with third person, you have a lot more freedom because your character could die in the middle of a scene. If it's a book and we could just follow another character, all kinds of things could happen. I think if you're going to do really bad things to your character, he gives a little distance between the reader and the protagonist. You gives even more because you're constantly telling readers they're doing something they're not doing. And so that always clashes with them, and it is always a distance. A lot of people don't like it, but it can work really well if you're trying to create a weird feeling of dissociation, which in a lot of weird fiction, like the kind of
All
stuff.
right, we have somebody who wants to maybe share part of their story. We may or may not have time for that, but we do have another question.
Okay.
What is your best place to start for inspiration? Do you do outlines or do you just free flow write?
A little bit of both. I may do a lot of just sort of like think about things once I have an idea. I try to pick like 4 or 5 things to kind of put together into an idea, because I like write stuff down on my phone, various ideas, images, words that I think are interesting, and I try to build from that. So I may not quite know what I'm building at first. Eventually, because these days for a long time, in order for me to get a book contract, I have to have some kind of outline or at least a short pitch. So I work that up. I may or may not do a more detailed outline after that. And then once I have the outline, I almost never look at it when I write anymore. I just go ahead and start writing, and I know in general what's supposed to happen, and I kind of just make other stuff up as I go. That's why I end up with weird endings, because a lot of times my absolute ending doesn't occur to me till I get right to it. I have this weird idea, And then it turns out the ending turns out differently than I expect. So it's just whatever works for you.
We also have another question. Are you familiar with the Lester Dent master plot formula? I'm sorry, I love making air quotes.
Yeah.
And so how applicable is it in writing suspense today?
The answer would be yes, and I don't know, because it's been so long since I've read about it. Nothing's popping into my mind exactly how it works. So, I mean, everybody look up Lester Del Rey.
And take a look if it works for you. A
Look at it
couple
and
more
see.
questions coming in. What common errors do you see beginning writers make in creating suspense?
They don't create any. They just tell the story straightforward. Everything happens relatively fast. They don't use any kind of sensory details or the character's thoughts to help build that. Everything in a story I think it should be experienced through a character's point of view. And people who write, they start writing, they often write like they're writing a movie, because that's how they've experienced stories. Even if they read a bunch, they've probably experienced thousands upon thousands of hours more of visual media. And so they write like they're a passive observer sitting and observing other people doing things. And that doesn't create suspense. If you are in a character's head and relating what they're thinking and feeling as these things are occurring, then you're more likely to be able to create suspense. So I think writing with at least a relatively close point of view is the answer to a whole lot of things in fiction. Readers want to go ahead and imagine what the character's doing, but by being in the character, that helps us a lot. It's a virtual reality experience that so far no other technology can do. Maybe someday.
Not compare.
Yeah.
Movies are good, but yeah, they just don't compare to the suspense. At least that's my opinion.
When in creative writing classes, I'll show a YouTube video. It's a snippet from one of the Jason Bourne movies. And, we watch these two, like Jason Bourne and a bad guy, fight. And there's one of his friends is there. She gets knocked out pretty early on, but she's there fighting too. And the camera shifts between them at different times. And then when it's over, I ask students whose point of view it was from, and they say Jason Bourne maybe. But somebody who may already know or just guess will say the audience. And then I show them a video. It's biting elbows, and it's for a song that's bad, and then it's a bad word after that. So you have to look it up. But it's done. It's the same people who did a movie called Hardcore Harry, and it's done as if the camera is the person's eyes. And so the video is a little spy video, spy story, but it's completely from the person's eyes. And I say, this is what you're supposed to imagine when you write. And it's difficult because almost none of your media shows that. Some first-person shooter or first-person video games do to a certain degree, but it's all just kind of movement and shooting, or we don't get like the thoughts of the character in a situational story exactly the same. I'd be interested. I haven't found anybody yet. I just haven't encountered it that played a lot of first-person type video games and then see what kind of fiction they write. They still often. A lot of video game players still write it as if they're writing, like watching a movie. So I don't know, but maybe somebody will get, really good at that kind of immersion.
Yeah. It makes me think of D&D.
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons and how that goes through that. So real quick, just catching up on some earlier questions. The slides, you said the slides were actually available on your website, which is timwaggoner.com.
Yeah. Just go to my website and then email me from there, because I have a contact tab. Okay. And so you hit contact, and then you email me from my email address and say, give me those slides, and I'll send them to you.
And then if we have time, do you have a second to talk about your plotting as a technique?
Yeah, this is, I don't know if it's the same question as we had a while back, but I'll answer that one first, and then I can talk about my own plotting technique. But the thing I was going to talk about way back when we got a question on plotting, there's a technique. I didn't create it. As far as I know, it was created by a writer named Dwight V. Swain, and it's called Scene and Sequel. I hate the name of it because most people have different definitions in writing for scene and sequel, and you have to know what the definitions are for this technique. So if you're going to look it up, just look up scene, sequel, writing, and then maybe technique too. And a million websites will pop up that will show you how to do it in much more detail. But really simply, this is a technique. It is like a formula. It is a formula. And you can follow it as a formula step by step, or eventually most writers if they kind of absorb it and just do it. It's like playing scales when you're first starting out as a musician, and later on, you have that embedded in you when you play. You don't have to think about it the same, or how to hit a baseball. You learn it step by step as a kid. Then when you're been playing for a while, you just kind of do it. So the scene is, you have to think of not what we call a scene, but in this technique, a scene is a unit of the story where the character works toward a sub goal that's part of the major goal. So the example I always use in class is that you have a character, he's divorced, but he wants to get back together with his wife. That's his main story goal. So what's one small sub step he could take? Well, he wants to have dinner with her. Got to make it hard for your characters. So she will not respond to him. Email doesn't work. Phone messages don't work. So he decides he's going to go actually visit her where she works. Maybe she's the boss where she works too. So if he goes there, he knows that, it would be uncomfortable for her, and maybe he can kind of catch her off guard there. She won't make a scene in front of her employees. So he goes there, and, it's still harder. And maybe he has to threaten to tell an embarrassing story about her. And she says, okay, fine, I'll go with you. That's the moment the scene ends. Things can keep going in the story, but that unit that's called a scene in this technique ends. So he's achieved his sub goal. Still want to make things hard for your readers. So, your characters. So even though he's achieved his sub goal, we'll make it harder. His wife is furious with him. She's going to go to dinner, but this is not going to be a dinner that starts off well. So the character then has a sequel, and the sequel, the rule is you have, for every scene, you have a sequel. They should be like back to back or linked like a chain or like little train cars. But depending on what happens, a sequel could be deferred till later, like in an action sequence, like in an Indiana Jones movie. 3 or 4 things may occur in an action sequence, and there's no time to process them to have a sequel till later. And so you might actually have 3 or 4 in a row, where like Indy and his friends are sitting around talking about what to do next. So our character, he's like, man, it's time for a sequel. He's got to process what happened. Like, she's going to have dinner with me, but she's so mad. What do I do? And maybe you haven't talked to a friend about it, just so he's not just in his own head. But eventually he says, okay, after dinner, I'm going to try to get her to take a walk with me, and we'll walk past the apartment building where we first lived when we were young and in love and first married. Maybe that'll rekindle some, fond thoughts of our relationship, and maybe take some of the anger away or whatever, bleed away some of the negative emotion we got going. So the thing that's cool about scene and sequel is that sequel gives you the next story goal, sub goal, which is get her to walk by the apartment. This also tells you what you can skip, because this means nothing happens at dinner that's important to the plot. So your next scene can begin with them walking down the sidewalk. And the ex-wife is like, I thought this dinner was going to be awful, but actually turned out pretty good. I think we can be really good friends, which is not what he wanted, but at least he's got past that part. So he's like, okay, we get past this apartment complex. Maybe that'll, nudge her a little toward romance. But then when they get there, they find out it burned down years ago. So she's like, okay, that's an omen, maybe laughingly, she says it's an omen, but he's like, damn it. So then either right then or later, he'll have a sequel. He'll process, this did not work. He failed. And so now what do I do next? And then once he comes up with a next, that goes into the next sequel, and so on and so forth. If you use the technique of scene and sequel, all you really need to know is an overall story goal, and you need to know your protagonist, and you need to know one step they'll take to achieve the story goal. Everything else you can just make up as you go from there. Sometimes people might call this action and reaction. You could, except that does sound more like a fight scene. You can use scene and sequel in fight scenes too. It's just they're super fast. The sequel, the scene would be, I'm going to punch this guy in the face. And so you do it. You try to punch the guy in the face, but then the guy blocks your blow. So you failed. And then your sequel is, oh, okay, how do I hit him next? I know I'm going to go ahead and try to punch him in the gut with my other arm. And so then there comes the scene. You're punching him with the gut. And you can just write entire action scenes as these tiny, tiny little scenes and sequels that just keep going like this. That's it. It's a really good technique. I learned about it when I started going to like science fiction conventions, and the writers on the panels would all talk about this technique as the one that allowed them to really write publishable fiction and professional level fiction. If you're loath to follow a formula, then you just kind of learn it, practice it a little bit, and then just go and write. But the technique also is you can write these things out on index cards. You can plot them out very mechanically. If you got a writing program, you can use that. but it's a scene. It's a technique that works great because even the readers don't recognize it. They will never see the formula. It's like at the end of the Matrix where Neo sees the code that makes that universe. Nobody will ever see that, but they instantly recognize it. Just like they don't, I'm talking about cake again. They don't have to know the recipe for a cake or how it's made to know that it tastes good. They recognize a cake that tastes good versus one that doesn't. And it's the same way with stories. They will recognize that as a well-made story, at least on that level of plotting.
We do have one last question if you happen to have time. I think this one's a quickie. Is it possible to take your class at Sinclair as a guest or any other classes for creative writing you might suggest that aren't part of a degree program?
Well, I mean, you can take the creative writing classes at Sinclair. You can always audit, and so you can just do as much or as little work as you want, but you're not going to earn a degree or anything, or degree credit from it. You can do that. You can take it as many times as you want to. A lot of people that will cycle through them and just write like something a little bit different the next time. I know there are lots of places that have creative writing class. Right now, a lot of places that did like face-to-face workshops are now doing everything.
Clarion West, I know it's having, they're a little pricey, but I did one of them in the summer and it was really interesting.
Yeah, and some of them are free. I'm going to be doing a workshop for them or class for them, I guess like this, in writing media tie-ins. And the instructors have their choice about whether it costs anything or it's free, and mine's free.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's in May. Where's my Post-it note?
You are very Post-it note reliant.
May 4th at 3 p.m. So
that's fantastic. All right. Well, guys, I think we're out of time. There's been some wonderful feedback. Everyone says thank you so much. And thank you so much, Tim. This has been wonderful. You want to go over your sources quick?
Oh, I'll just leave this one. I forgot this was there. So these are the sources I just used to help me write this thing.
Oh, and guys, I will say real quick, library plug, lynda.com is actually one of our databases that you can actually take creative writing classes through as well. So that's another great, wonderful resource with your library card. And Tim Waggoner, thank you so much for doing this today. I wrote so many notes down. Everybody, you can go to his website to get the slides today. And thank you so much, Tim.
Yeah, and if anybody has any other questions, they can email them to me as well.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. It was wonderful chatting and working with you all today. Have a great, someone says they have a whole page of notes. Oh, that's wonderful.
Thanks so much, everybody.